Coming up on the Unscripted Ohio podcast for Friday, September 21st, we know Nick Bosa has had surgery. How long will he be out for? And what can the Buckeyes do in his absence? Urban Meyer addressed the media and is back this week for the Tulane game. Did he do the right thing addressing the Zach Smith situation head-on this past Monday? We'll get into the game with Gary Smith, publisher of thewavereport.com, previewing Tulane. And Mark Gibler of BuckeyeGrove.com will be here. We'll get into some Buckeye recruiting. All coming up next on the Unscripted Ohio podcast.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. We are brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. Gotta admit, I'm a little distracted right now. We're going to talk Buckeyes today. A lot coming up to talk about, actually. We've got Gary Smith. He is the publisher of thewavereport.com. Covers Tulane on the Rivals Network. He'll come in to preview Tulane. I know this is not exactly a climactic clash. There's not a lot to talk about here. We don't have a lot of drama. Ohio State is a 37-point favorite as I record this. But he will come in to preview the Tulane side. Mark Gibler, BuckeyeGrove.com recruiting analyst, will be in later in the show. Got a lot to cover on Ohio State. You know, where the Buckeyes sit with Zach Harrison. We'll talk about the receivers. Jamison Williams could be deciding any day now. Is he favoring the Buckeyes? Ohio State has a huge defensive end prospect, one of the top players in the country in the 2020 class, also visiting this weekend. We'll get into all of that with Mark here later in the show. I want to talk some Nick Bosa coming up here in a few minutes, actually in a minute or so, and then I also want to talk about the Urban Meyer stuff. Urban Meyer will be back on the sidelines here on Saturday for Ohio State, and I know many of you are excited about that. It's going to be one heck of an atmosphere in St. John Arena for the Skull session when he walks out tomorrow morning. Actually, tomorrow afternoon. I got to remind myself that this game against Tulane is not a noon game. It is a 3:30 kickoff. So Urban Meyer is back, but he did address the media about the Zach Smith situation. I have a few thoughts I want to get into with that, but I'm a little distracted as I get ready to talk about Ohio State football because as I'm recording this, the Browns game is on and Baker Mania is in full effect now. You know, Baker Mayfield taking over for Tyrod Taylor, who was checked out of the game late in the first half for concussion symptoms. And Baker comes in and has looked absolutely splendid. So I'm recording this and keeping an eye on the Browns game. And you probably know if you follow me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter, obviously, at KYLAM8. If you follow me, you know I'm a Bengals guy. I'm a Bengals fan. So I'm not necessarily rooting for Cleveland, but I am interested and intrigued by Baker Mayfield. I was saying all spring long that the Browns should take Baker Mayfield. I think he is the best quarterback in this class. And although I'm not necessarily rooting for the Browns, I think that the right call was made putting him in, even if it was for injury. Obviously, maybe at that point it was a no-brainer because they had to put somebody in. But I think Baker Mayfield has earned the right, and even though as I'm finishing this, I don't know what the result of the game is. You know, the Browns could find a way to lose the Jets game. But the point is, Baker Mayfield, Baker Mania, I think is here to stay. I think Mayfield is the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns going forward. If nothing else, the Browns will definitely be interesting to watch with this defense that they have. Now putting Baker in there, he's clearly a more talented player than Tyrod Taylor. Very anxious to see how this plays out for the Browns. But we have Ohio State football to talk about, of course, here on the Unscripted Ohio podcast. As much as we are an Ohio-themed podcast, and we will talk about some other things throughout the year, the Blue Jackets getting ready to crank up their season. We'll talk about them. Browns and Bengals as it's relevant. Reds and Indians if it's relevant. Certainly not the Buckeyes are not the only thing we like to talk about on the show, but it is mostly an Ohio State podcast, and we do have plenty to talk about here for this week. For instance, Nick Bosa. We know now, we were speculating that this would be the case, but we know for a fact that according to Urban Meyer on his call-in radio show in Columbus on Thursday, Nick Bosa has gone into surgery for what they are calling a core abdomen injury. I don't know the exact term, but what I've been told is that this has something to do with where the abdomen muscles connect to the groin muscle, okay? And some people are calling that a sports hernia. I don't know if that's the case. That's not the term that I was given. I wasn't really given a term, but that's how it was described to me. But it is an injury where the abdominal muscles connect to the groin. And this can be a very serious situation as far as recovery is concerned. Look, I know people have been trying to relate and compare their own surgeries for sports hernias and other types of groin issues. All I can tell you is that it's supposed to be a very complicated recovery time. I know some people are throwing out 4 to 6 weeks. It could be 4 to 6 weeks. I'm not telling you it's not, but I can tell you Ohio State seems to be operating under the impression that there is a wide window, a big range of time that Nick Bosa could be working with as far as his rehab. I mean, it could be 4 to 6 weeks. It could be 6 to 8 weeks. It could be 8 to 10 weeks. It could be the rest of the season. So temper your enthusiasm on Nick Bosa. I'm not telling you he's going to be out for the year. I don't think Ohio State even knows, but I am telling you everything is on the table. It could be a few weeks miraculously. I mean, we certainly did not think there was any way in the world Tough Borland would be back suiting up for the Buckeyes in week number 1 of the 2018 season, coming off of that Achilles injury back in April. We thought Tough Borland would be out at least 6 or 7 games, maybe more, but yet here Tough Borland is ready to take on his full-time starting role in week number 4 now for the Buckeyes. So, Nick Bosa could make a miraculous recovery. That's a possibility, but I think if you're being honest with yourself, if you're trying not to get too excited, look, he's not going to be back next week for Penn State, in my opinion. That's just not on the table. This could be a several-month injury, and I think it's wise to just assume that he's not going to be back anytime in the near future. And quite honestly, if the Buckeyes are able to go into Happy Valley and win next week without him, I'm not sure that they will need Nick Bosa on the field until maybe the Michigan game at the end of November. I think they are capable of beating everybody else on their schedule, including Michigan State, Nebraska, all those other teams. I think they'll be fine if they win in Happy Valley. Now, that's a big if. That's going to be a tough test. But I think if they get by that game, for as good of a player as Nick Bosa is, and he is the best player in the country, in my opinion, I don't think they're going to need to worry about him being on the field until that game against the team up north in November. So we'll see, but I'm just trying to say I don't know when Nick Bosa will or won't be back. I'm not saying he's out for the season. I'm saying Ohio State doesn't even really seem to know that. I don't think they know. I think we could be talking 8 to 10 weeks. Could be less. It could be more. But just don't try tricking yourself into thinking, well, it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks because this guy said, it took him this long to come back from a sports hernia. I don't think it's that simple. So we'll see. I do believe Nick Bosa will probably suit up for Ohio State again. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I do think that's going to happen. But just be patient and don't try to trick yourself into thinking there's a certain game or a certain week he will be back for, because I just don't think it's that simple. So Ohio State will be going into this Tulane game without Nick Bosa. That in itself, obviously, not really that big of a deal. The Buckeyes do not need Nick Bosa to win against the Green Wave on Saturday. I've got Gary Smith, of course, publisher of thewavereport.com, coming up in a few minutes. And we'll talk about the game. I think I have a feeling he'll probably tell you the same thing. I think even Tulane folks are very realistic about the chances of Tulane knocking off at Ohio State on Saturday. You can never say never. You have to play these games for a reason. We've seen upsets before. They happen. But, man, this would be an upset of gargantuan proportions, historic proportions. There have been games with bigger spreads where somebody has won. We know Howard beat UNLV last year, 47-point underdog. So these things happen occasionally. At 37 points, this wouldn't be as big of an upset as Howard beating UNLV, although, I don't know, maybe you think it would be a bigger upset. As far as point spread is concerned, it would not, but Tulane beating Ohio State would be, we'd all jump off bridges at that point. That would be a pretty big deal. But Urban Meyer coaching, they didn't need Urban Meyer to come back. They didn't need Nick Bosa for this game. But it's interesting he's back, and really the bigger story to Urban Meyer being back is the fact that on Monday, in his return press conference, he has this weekly Monday press conference where he meets with the media. That's typical. And he came back and he basically laid it out all on the line for 45 minutes. The first 15 minutes were his monologue where he tackled the Zach Smith situation head on. He went through chronologically, explained everything that happened from his point of view, why he made the choices he made. And then he, spent a half hour in the Q&A where basically everything had to do with the Zach Smith situation and his subsequent suspension. And I see a lot of people commenting on this, and I'm not going to spend very much time, but I do want to head off this point. I want to tackle this point because I think it's important. I see some people saying, both in the media, fans, national and local media, and some fans as well, a little bit of a mix of all three, but I see some saying, if he had just come out and said the things he said on Monday from the very beginning, we wouldn't be in the situation. Same thing in the press conference when he was suspended that Wednesday night. The 9 o'clock p.m. press conference where the Board of Trustees had been meeting for 12 hours. If he had just said those things on that night, there would be less confusion. There would be a less critical media handling the suspension. The problem with that line of thinking is Urban Meyer was not in a position to come out and be as forthright and forthcoming as he was on Monday. Back in July, there were legal issues as far as Zach Smith's case. There's just so much. You can't come out and just tell the media everything. And I take umbrage with the idea by opposing fans or media that think it is the job of the coach to be entirely truthful with you. Urban Meyer's job is not to come out and spill the beans on everything going on behind the scenes. Just because he's a public employee doesn't mean you are entitled to 100% forthrightness or truthfulness about everything. And the only reason Urban Meyer had to come out and be as detail-oriented in this press conference as he was is because people did not accept the fact that he was not willing to give you all of the details in the first place. And it's unfortunate we live in a society and a culture that demands that kind of transparency for details that, quite frankly, are none of their business. It's not your business why he said some of the things he said. It's not our business why he did not tell us everything about the Zach Smith situation, because those are not relevant details. I didn't like it when everybody was talking about him lying to the media, because whether he lied to the media on July 24th in Chicago, it didn't really matter to us. It didn't matter if he was telling the truth. It didn't change the facts of the situation. It did not change whether or not Courtney Smith was abused. It did not change whether or not Urban Meyer and Gene Smith and Ohio State treated the allegations properly, both in terms of ethics and protocol. Protocol more than ethics, because I don't like the ethical argument. I'm concerned, did you follow the letter and spirit of the law? And they did. It turns out that they did do what they were supposed to do. Ohio State had it reported to them by the Powell Police Department, and they reported it. End of story. That's all that matters here. So let's not go down this road thinking that Urban Meyer was obligated to tell us the truth on July 24th. And he did. I don't think he was lying, but it doesn't matter if he were, because it was never relevant to begin with. And so now we're in a situation, he comes out Monday, and because people did not accept the truth to begin with, and because they were not happy about how the press conference came. And by the way, the press conference was a disaster. When he was suspended, that was a mistake. They should have issued a press release, and I know they couldn't because of the circus of all the media gathering in place the entire day. They felt compelled to have this press conference. But because basically the Board of Trustees and President Michael Drake had custom retrofit the findings of the case to fit the punishment, they knew what the punishment was going to be. They had to make the findings look like it fit the punishment. Because of that, we wound up with a disaster of a press conference. And that's where we are at now. Because of those things, because of people not accepting the truth in Chicago, the truth as it really is, not as people see it and perception-wise. And in terms of perception, they don't see the truth. But because they don't accept that, because they don't accept how that press conference came across a few weeks back, we are now in a situation where Urban Meyer had to clear the air on Monday. He is back as Ohio State head coach. I know people are criticizing, saying he should have left this alone. It would go away. I think because of the previous issues, especially that press conference, because of that disaster, Urban Meyer was in a situation where he had to address this head on. It's a shame, but I actually think it helped. And yes, it came across well. I think Urban Meyer came across as sincere and truthful and forthright to most people. But I don't accept the fact, well, he should have done that to begin with, because no, I don't think those details would have been relevant 1 month ago. We didn't need to know the level of detail that we wound up learning on Monday. The only reason it became necessary now was because of the media digging on all of these irrelevant factors over the past month. And now it's all out in the open, and Urban Meyer's truthfulness, integrity, sincerity, it's all been questioned. And so he was attacking back and feeling like he had to be heard. And so I don't blame him for being forthright. I think it was helpful for him to come out and spill those details and go over and do a post-mortem and explain everything that happened. I think it came across well. It's unfortunate there will be some people that just don't care and don't listen, but I think it was necessary. So here we are. Urban Meyer is now back as head coach for Ohio State. He will get a very loud reception tomorrow afternoon in St. John Arena. I am sure of that. But look, I just wanted to get that off my chest because I don't like how people are saying, well, he should have said this to begin with. That wouldn't have been relevant a month ago. He couldn't go into that level of detail, and nobody should have expected it to. Anyhow, time to talk Ohio State Tulane. First, I've got Gary Smith, publisher of thewavereport.com, covering Tulane. And then after that, Mark Gibler, recruiting analyst of BuckeyeGrove.com, will be in, and we'll get into some recruiting on the Buckeyes.
It's time to go inside Ohio State recruiting and take a peek behind the scenes with Buckeye Grove recruiting guru Mark Gibler and his magical orb of wonderment. They said it couldn't be done, but he's outdone himself once more. Back for another recruiting roundup.
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
All right, long last, after several weeks off on vacation, at least from the podcast, my man's Mark is back, and dude, it's been a long time. Like I had to do a lot of research for this because I couldn't remember where we left off and what we had talked about the last time you've been on.
Yeah, been an interesting couple weeks, but I think a lot of the focus has really been on the team. So, but I think things are about to pick back up here now that Urban Meyer's back on the sideline and going to get into the teeth of the Big Ten schedule here in a couple weeks, and things should definitely start I guess building or picking up steam here.
So, generic talk here, you mentioned back when we last spoke, if this was going to happen, the Urban Meyer stuff, if this was going to happen, it was probably the best time that it could have happened. And it certainly does not seem like Ohio State was hit too hard. I mean, I think anytime you have that kind of, thing happen, it's probably going to impact you at least a little bit. Kane Patterson wound up going to Clemson and committing. Now, that may or may not have happened without this. You have intimated it may have just been a good reason for him to do it, but it may have happened anyway. But I think overall, so far, we haven't seen a huge effect on recruiting. Where does Ohio State stand now that they've got Urban back and in the mix? It seems like, they're slowly getting their feet back under them and getting back into the process.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to rebuild some momentum here, and, they were kind of stalling out a little bit before all this happened. I mean, some of the situations we've been talking about here, Peyton Powell gets the Oklahoma offer, Kane Patterson gets the Clemson offer. I mean, those were going to be serious issues for Ohio State, no matter what. I mean, regardless of what was going on with Urban Meyer, whether he was suspended or not, those were going to be some hurdles that they were going to have to clear anyway. And so, it was kind of, plugging along anyway. And then, you hit August, which is a bad month for recruiting in general, just because there's no visits and everyone's getting ready for their seasons. And Meyer gets suspended, and so it's hard to really bring in guys on visits when the head coach isn't there. If it's a 2019 guy that you're really serious about, you want Urban Meyer there. So, yeah, I mean, right now it's just getting some momentum back. I think, I'm not a big fan of, they need to get a commitment here or there or whatever. I think, commitments are just going to happen when they happen. But I do think this would be a good time to get a commitment. I mean, I don't say that very often. I really hate saying that. I think that it's just typically just a knee-jerk emotional thing that people say when a team has went, a little bit without a commitment. But they could use something right now, whether that's a Jamison Williams or another, an Elijah Higgins or anybody, whoever's out there. I mean, I think Zach Harrison's going to go a little bit longer, but they could use one right now.
Yeah, it's cliche to say, but sometimes it can help just because, recruits talk, and when they see the momentum, it can just kind of renew and reinvigorate, the excitement in another recruit. So I think there is some, like you said, I think it's definitely overplayed, but it's something tangible that can absolutely help. You mentioned Peyton Powell. He got his Oklahoma offer, and interestingly enough, Ohio State had a handful of recruits in the stands at the TCU game. Being a neutral field game officially, they were able to do that. Powell was one of the guys there. Where is Ohio State with Powell right now in your mind?
Yeah, I talked to him on Sunday, which was actually surprising. He's not easy to reach, so I kind of proved his existence, I guess. There's a lot of my information on Peyton over the last several months has had to come from other channels because Peyton doesn't do many interviews, but I was able to reach him on Sunday. I'm sure a lot of people read the story, but it just, he was impressed with the product Ohio State put on the field, how they responded. Kind of told me that he, expected them to go down there and take care of business, and that's what they did. And, he has been keeping up with Urban Meyer ever since Meyer was able to start calling guys again on I believe it was September 3rd. And he's been keeping up with Greg Schiano as well, even back in August during this time. So they have not given up. It's really hard for me to go against Oklahoma right now there. He may visit Texas this weekend, and then maybe Oklahoma, I think, has a home game either one of the next couple weekends. Oklahoma plays Baylor. I believe it's in 2 weeks. If that visit to Oklahoma gets set, that just smells like a make my last visit to Oklahoma and then commit type of visit to me. I mean, that to me, looks like a business trip. Now sometimes these things go haywire, and maybe it doesn't happen for him. But if that visit gets set up here in the next 2 or 3 weeks, like it's supposed to be, and then he comes to a decision, right after that, which he told me he'd like to decide by his birthday, that may not happen. But anything that happens in the next 2 or 3 weeks to me is going to favor Oklahoma as long as that visit gets set up.
Speaking of birthdays, a guy you mentioned earlier, Jamison Williams, there's some rumors he would be announcing, I believe it's his birthday, September 26th. Is that right?
That's Peyton's birthday.
Okay. There was
but Jamison's in that I could decide any day now type of, that's what he's telling people. So it's in the same category, I guess, with Peyton Powell of could happen anytime. I would go the opposite on Jamison that I just said about Peyton. I think anything that happens in the next week or two would favor Ohio State. I think that's, I think they've been the team to beat there for several months. I'm not so sure if Meyer hadn't got suspended and was able to kind of keep the momentum they had going with Jamison, talking to him in August and some of the contact that was lost there, and then the coaching change and everything else. I'm not so sure that, maybe he wouldn't be in the class already. But, I mean, sooner the better, I think, there for Ohio State. Now, he's got these visits scheduled. We'll see if he makes them. He's got these officials he's supposed to be making, Nebraska, and I think there's supposed to be an Alabama trip in here somewhere. And so he's sort of played this game a little bit before as far as I think I'm ready to commit soon. So it's we're not quite yet at the boy who cried wolf, but we're at that point where you have to kind of, let's see if he's actually going to, go through with the decision. But, that to me is the opposite of Powell. I think sooner the better for Ohio State on that one.
Now, the other receiver I want to ask you about, you said back in August that you thought Ohio State may have more favor for Elijah Higgins with Brian Hartline in the mix as opposed to where, maybe Zach Smith felt about Higgins. So Higgins is, there has been some rumors out there that Ohio State maybe is gaining ground and he's becoming more familiar with Brian Hartline. But I understand you think it's probably still Florida and Stanford at the top, but Ohio State maybe getting back in the mix a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the three. Would any one of those three particularly shock me? No. I thought it was, I thought Florida has probably picked up the most momentum the last couple months. They seem to have done a nice job there. But there, to me, when Zach Smith was fired, there was an opportunity. There are people on that staff that really like Elijah Higgins, perhaps more than Zach Smith did. And I think that obviously is going to help in terms of the percentages or whatever you want to call them of Higgins ending up in Columbus, because obviously if your receivers coach isn't as high on you as some of the other members of the staff, that's going to be an issue when it comes time to sit down and everyone makes their pitch to Urban Meyer on who to take and who their guy is and everything else. I think they are improving. I know, Coach Hartline is working Elijah Higgins pretty hard right now. The guy who deserves a lot of credit for keeping this all together through all this, through not just the Zach Smith situation, the Urban Meyer suspensions, but even back in the spring when I don't think anyone was even sure where Higgins stood with the coaching staff, or that Higgins was sure where he stood with the coaching staff. Ryan Day has kept this thing together for 6 months now, 7 months now. So he gets a lot of credit here, and they're still in the mix. Would I take the field? I would. If you gave me Stanford and Florida over Ohio State, I'd probably take Stanford and Florida as a combined pick over Ohio State. But those are the three I think right now, and I think they've got a shot. I mean, we'll see what happens here. I mean, and these dominoes are going to have to fall eventually. I mean, we've been waiting for these receiver dominoes to fall for what seems like half a year now, and they just haven't.
That's so true.
Something's got to give here eventually.
There's a good probably half dozen of them that we thought at any one time in the last 3, 4, or 5 months could have fallen and haven't. So it's kind of funny that we've been waiting on so many of them and none have fallen. I've got a trio of defensive ends I want to ask you about, and I know one of them will actually be a nice segue into this weekend. But let's start with the obligatory bi-monthly Zach Harrison update. Everybody constantly wants to know, is it Ohio State? Is it Michigan? Is, some people still trying to think Penn State, maybe being in the mix. But has anything changed with Zach Harrison?
No, and here, Zach is just, when he made the decision to not announce in the middle of August, that was a conscious choice to pretty much put recruiting to the side and focus on his senior season. Now, that got delayed. He tweaked his knee a little bit, I guess the last scrimmage, missed the first 3 games, back last week. But he is really just focused right now on playing football. He's very close with a lot of his teammates. He takes the responsibility of kind of his status as a recruit very seriously in terms of not wanting to disrespect his teammates or the Olentangy Orange football program and kind of put his recruiting process above that. One of my favorite Zach stories is he was at a 7-on-7. I'm kind of standing there talking to him, and some parent just comes up and says, says something along the lines of, what football team are you, where are you playing or whatever, and Zach, instead of just blowing off the question or whatever, Zach very emphatically said, I play for Olentangy Orange High School. The guy wanted an Ohio State or Michigan answer, and Zach's like, no, I play for Olentangy Orange High School. So he's very, very serious about that. I don't think we're going to see a decision until after they are done playing. So that's at least 6-7 weeks away. I think it's going to go at least into the middle of November. I could definitely see it going almost pretty much all the way up till the middle of December because I do think he's going to try and enroll early. But there's not a whole lot new there other than what I did mention last week, which is this is the significant part, I guess, if you're an Ohio State fan. He's been very mature was the word that was used to me about the whole Urban Meyer thing. He has not been very reactionary to any of that news. He's kind of digested all of it, and it was put very clearly to me that even though Zach doesn't want to comment on it publicly, he's just not his deal to comment really on anything, but let alone something that's controversial. But it was made very clear to me that neither he nor his family think that Urban Meyer did anything in terms of covering up domestic violence. So there has not been, from what I've been told, this major negative impact there with Zach in terms of how he or his family view Urban Meyer or Ohio State in general. So, I still think if Ohio State goes out there and has a great season and Michigan goes out there and has a so-so season, that he ends up at Ohio State. I mean, that's the best way I can put it right now.
So I want to ask you about another guy, Nolan Smith. You mentioned last time we spoke, it was looking like Ohio State was going to get a visit. And look, I want to preface this by saying I'm not one of those guys that reads into everything that kids say on Twitter, because sometimes these kids just have fun on Twitter. It doesn't always mean anything. It doesn't have to mean anything. But he has been mixing it up a lot here recently with a lot of the Ohio State commitments and targets. It just seems like Ohio State is definitely on his mind at very, very least here as we go into the fall.
Yeah, trying to gauge how much of this is. I mean, Nolan's a big personality. We've talked about that. I mean, he's a very outgoing guy. So he kind of shoots from the hip a lot. But it seems to me, I personally think he's going to stick with Georgia at this point. I don't have anything to suggest that he's not. But it seems to me like that possible second school that's given him some pause right now is Ohio State. And almost all of that is Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson, in all honesty, probably should have given up on Nolan Smith 6 months ago if he were normal. But for whatever reason, he has kept plugging away, and Nolan has was very emphatic recently in telling me that he's going to visit. If you're Ohio State, you're going to get one swing at this if you're lucky, which would be on that official visit, obviously. So I think it'll be go big or go home. I think it'll be probably the Michigan game if they get him up. That's the week they're shooting for, I believe. I know that's the week they're trying to get Noah Cain up there as well from IMG. So that would make sense. So that, I would love to have something more groundbreaking than that. But at the end of the day, with Nolan, you just have to wait until he makes it to camp. Like, you just have to sit and wait. Like, there's really nothing I can say that's going to be that profound until Nolan Smith sets one foot in Columbus. And, as all over the map as he can be sometimes, you can't always just bank on that happening. You kind of just have to see it. So we are about 2 months away, I think, from really picking, seeing this pick up some steam if it does. But they're plugging away. And like I said, I think he's the best player in the country. So you got to try. I mean.
And I will offer this caveat. It's funny. I'm the one that brought up his Twitter interactions, and I was just reminding people not to read too much into it. I only bring it up just because it is noticeable, but try not to get too giddy. Just because a kid is out there, shooting off with a bunch of his friends on Twitter, it doesn't mean he's going there, but it is noteworthy nonetheless. So the other guy I wanted to ask you about, a guy that will be on campus here this weekend, one of the top, if not, probably the top defensive end in the 2020 class, Brian Brzee. So what can you tell me about this battle shaping up with Ohio State, Penn State, some others, and his visit here coming up this weekend?
Yeah, this is important for me because, they haven't had him on campus since about the end of October last year. They had him on campus like 3 times in a 6-month window last year, and have not had him back since. So we're going on about 11 months. And in that time, he has kind of made the rounds nationally. He took some visits down south. I believe he went out west a little bit. And he's been to Penn State several times. And in fact, I believe he's going to be at Penn State next weekend for the Ohio State game. So I don't want to say they've lost momentum. I think that's being overly dramatic, but they need to reconnect there. And it's going to be good. It's going to be good, I think, to get him on in a weekend like this because there aren't going to be 10 other 5-star kids on campus. I think they'll be able to get a lot of individual time with him, even though it's a game day visit. Assuming he gets there, promptly and is able to stick around afterwards and everything else, there should be ample time to, spend with him. Penn State's going to be tough to beat here. They're a few hours up the road. Like I said on the board the other day, they're the closest, nationally elite caliber program to him. And they recruit that area very well, state of Maryland. And, they've definitely been able to get him on campus a lot lately, so they've certainly picked up some momentum. I think they're the team to beat right now. I don't think Ohio State's that far behind. I think Ohio State's certainly up there. So this is good timing. I'll even, not to keep running at the mouth here, but I'll even go a step further. If you can impress him this weekend, and then you can go in, if he's at this Penn State game next weekend, and if you can go in there and show him something again, even though he's visiting as a Penn State guest, I think it's good timing. You get him on campus this weekend, then you get to go up to Penn State. His possible leader right now. I don't think he's actually said that, but that's the sentiment right now. I think there's an opportunity here the next couple weeks to make a move.
Well, those are 3 guys that right there, Harrison and Smith and Brzee. If Ohio State manages to get even 2 of those, my goodness, I mean that's quite a haul for the next couple of years. So, what do we have on the slate here this weekend along with Brzee? There are a couple other guys I understand coming in. What does the slate look like for the Buckeyes on campus here this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to look a little bit similar to what we saw the first couple of weeks, where it just kind of fills in late, and we get a lot of Ohio kids, local kids in. But the one thing other than Brian Brzee being on campus, the one aspect I find interesting of this weekend is there are at least a handful of the commits are going to be coming in, and some of them like Harry Miller's coming in from Atlanta, outside of Atlanta. Dwan Mathis is coming down from Michigan, obviously, and I've talked to Dwan's father, Terrence, and he told me that they're trying to get as many of these commits there as possible as kind of a show of support to Urban Meyer on behalf of the commits. That they're behind him, and that it like he told me, he said it's just gonna be him, his wife, and Dwan coming down to just to show support and to be there for Meyer's first game back on the sideline, and I know that's the sentiment from the Harry Miller camp as well. So I thought that was a nice touch, and I think that shows kind of the not only the character of some of the kids they've recruited, but I think it shows kind of what we've been talking about for the last month or two, that I don't think this has really hurt Urban Meyer's image with the recruits. We can talk about the national media and other rival fans and everything else that are obviously not so much in the Meyer camp right now, but I don't sense that his image with players and their families has taken a big hit here, and I think this type of show of support that we're going to see Saturday with some of the commits coming in, traveling far distances on unofficial visits to just to be on campus and to be around Coach Meyer on Saturday. I think that's a good sign.
I'm just taking a wild stab here. I have a feeling that Skull Session entrance is going to be pretty loud on Saturday when Urban leads the team into St. John Arena. Just taking a stab there, but
yeah, who would have thought that Tulane could end up being one of the better environments of the season? I mean, if you had that in July, you got paid off of that.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's going to be hilarious how this turned out with I think that's the game everyone pointed at the beginning of the year. Like, well, that's going to be dead. It's going to be a dead noon kickoff. It's a 3:30 kick, and the place is probably going to be nuts.
Yeah, who would have fancied that? I would have lost some money on that for sure. So. All right, well, Mark Givler, you can catch him on Twitter at MarkGivlerBG, and of course you can read his work. Does a fantastic job on BuckeyeGrove.com. Mark, I appreciate you catching up with us, and maybe it won't be another 3 weeks before we talk to you again.
No, I think things will pick back up here, and I'm sure we'll be back at it soon.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
All right, I'm here now with Gary Smith of the Wave Report. Gary, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule here to take a couple minutes and talk about this Tulane Ohio State game on Saturday.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me on the show.
So let's start big picture stuff. I've seen, Tulane has had a couple of very highly competitive losses. Start the year at Wake Forest, and then most recently at UAB, sandwiched in between a win over Nicholls State. Talk about just in general the coming up short in these two games against UAB and Wake Forest.
Yeah, it's funny. I did Oklahoma radio last year before Tulane played Oklahoma, and I'm going to start off just with a general comment that I think Tulane's a lot better than it's performed this year. It's not actually relevant for this game because obviously I'm not going to tell you anything different than you already know. Ohio State is infinitely superior to Tulane. I will say, and it's probably not going to be I can't see it being a close game, but I will say I actually do think Tulane is more talented than either Rutgers or Oregon State, which Ohio State destroyed in the first two games of the year. Tulane should be 3-0 right now, but simply just hadn't played well this year. They were honestly, they lost to Wake Forest in overtime at home to start the year, but they really didn't play well in that game. They had hit a couple of big plays, then were 5 yards away from kicking a winning field goal at the end of regulation, had a penalty messed up, got penalty in overtime and lost. Then they went on the road to UAB after beating Nicholls State, and midway through the second quarter, they'd been outgained. I believe the stat was 235-15. Then they started playing, came back and tied the game. Looked like they were going to have that game won when they pinned UAB back at the 7-yard line, and they allowed UAB to drive 93 yards for a touchdown midway through the fourth quarter to take the lead and win. It's a very disappointing start for Tulane, which really, really was optimistic that it could become bowl eligible this year. Now at 1-2, staring at obvious 1-3 after this week. Going to be very difficult for Tulane to win 5 games in the American Athletic Conference. So it's kind of an upset, angry team that's going to be going to Ohio State. I think if they were playing a different opponent, it might help Tulane being in that mood. It's not going to matter on Saturday because just obviously of the talent discrepancy.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about how they had a chance. Probably didn't even play well in those games and had a chance.
They did not. They have not. Willie Fritz's teams don't make mistakes. They don't beat themselves. And Tulane made a ton of mistakes against Wake Forest, one penalty after the other, which was just incredibly uncharacteristic. And then the other reason I thought Tulane was possibly bowl-bound going into this year was their quarterback, Jonathan Banks, who played really well at the end of last year. He's always been mercurial. He's on his 4th school in his career, played at 2 junior colleges around 1 year at Kansas State. But he just hadn't played well. Against UAB, he went 7 for 26, fumbled the ball twice, one of which was run back for a touchdown, and threw his first interception in 98 attempts. If he even plays half decently against UAB, Tulane wins that game. But he didn't. And he didn't play that well against Wake Forest either. And that's another big concern for Tulane because they'd kind of hitched their wagon to him this year. He was going to be the guy that was going to carry this team. And it hasn't happened. And they really do have good skill position players around them. They've got 2 excellent running backs in Darius Bradwell and Corey Dauphine, and 2 excellent wide receivers in Darnell Mooney and Taron Ankalad. They need Jonathan Banks to start playing better because he's the trigger guy in the offense, and he hadn't been getting it done so far this year.
Banks is an interesting stat line because you mentioned just the 1 interception in 77 attempts so far this year, but only a 48% completion percentage.
Yeah.
Very, very weird because you don't see those 2 numbers go together like that very often.
No, not normally. I'd say he's been so inaccurate, it's been hard for the defense to catch the ball, too, in some of those games. I mean, it's strange because he's better than that. Like I said, he's never going to be a guy who's going to be consistent down to down. That's not the type of player he is, but he's a playmaker. And right now he's been making plays for the wrong team so far this year. And it's not going to be relevant Saturday in the horseshoe, but he's the guy when Tulane opens against Memphis in their conference play the next week. He has to get his act together because they still have a chance to have a decent year in the conference. You hear Tulane, you look at their history, you see their results over the years, and it's not good. But this team is a lot more talented than the Tulane teams in past years, and unfortunately, they don't have the record to prove it at this point.
Well, and right now, where it starts for Tulane is the run game you mentioned. Bradwell is the primary workhorse, averaging just over 5 yards a carry, and Dauphine, the Texas Tech transfer, averaging a very robust 12 yards a carry in 19 attempts. So definitely a very productive core of backs there.
Right, and also throw out Bradwell's stats from the first 2 games this year because he was really banged up. He wasn't healthy. He probably shouldn't have played. He wasn't good. He was healthy last week. He had 90 yards on 15 carries. They also used him some as a wildcat quarterback. He's productive there, too. Dauphine, against Nicholls State, and granted, yes, it's Nicholls State, although Nicholls had beaten Kansas the week before. First time he touches the ball, 38-yard touchdown. Second time he touches the ball, 69-yard touchdown. Later in the game, 35-yard touchdown. He could have gained like 250 yards in that game, but he kind of hyperventilated after his second touchdown, and they couldn't play him for a quarter and a half because he was exhausted on the sidelines. And at first they said he was dehydrated, and then their trainer said no, he wasn't dehydrated. They tried to give him an IV, and it wouldn't take because he was fine. It was a mental thing with him. He just felt exhausted. But he's really talented. He's a guy, even against an Ohio State, if he gets in the open field, he was a former 200-meter track champion in Texas. He's a guy that's hard to catch. I would say of all the guys on Tulane's roster that might be able to do damage against Ohio State, he's number one if he can get enough carries to show it.
Well, and offensively, with the fact that Tulane has not sustained drives this year, and that's probably that's probably the issue. But they have certainly shown the ability with those big plays, and with an Ohio State defense that has given up some big plays. I imagine there's at least some optimism that Tulane can put at least some points on the board.
Yeah, I think I agree. When Tulane played Oklahoma last year, Oklahoma was not ready to play. Let's start with that. They were flatter than a pancake. But Tulane, the first time they had the ball, they drove the length of the field for a touchdown to go up 7-0. The next time they had the ball, they drove the length of the field for a touchdown to go up 14-7. They were driving again to try to go up 21-14 in the second quarter, and the quarterback threw a pick six. Jonathan Banks was actually hurt for that game and didn't play. And Oklahoma scored to go up 21-14, and that was it. Oklahoma woke up and won 56-14. But Tulane did move the ball on Oklahoma. Ohio State, even with Bosa not playing, is a more talented defense than Oklahoma was last year. But I do think Tulane has the weapons that they can move the ball and do some things on offense. It's going to be the other side of the ball where the issues come in.
Yeah, let's get into that, because I was going to ask you. Obviously, for what I'm seeing here, giving up 200 yards rushing a game in the first 3 games, it definitely seems like Tulane is going to have to offer some resistance up front against Ohio State's running game to have any chance of winning on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tulane's defense is also a little bit better than it's played, but it's not good enough to slow down Ohio State. Let's be realistic here. The interesting guy to watch on Tulane's defense is their freshman nose tackle, Jeffrey Johnson. He was actually heavily recruited by Alabama and FSU in his junior year of high school. And then he got a false diagnosis of a high enzyme count, and the doctor in his small hometown told him that he would have to give up football and do no exercise. And so for about 3 months, he did just that, and he gained about 50 pounds. And then he got a new diagnosis when he went on a recruiting visit to Alabama, and they told him they thought that was not the right diagnosis. So he checked it out, and it turned out he was fine. By then, the season had already started. He ended up playing. Obviously, the FSUs and the Alabamas of the world went away. He was overweight, fell into Tulane's lap. He's a good player. He's going to be a great player for Tulane down the road, and he's a guy that can physically stand up. He's 330 pounds, and he has nimble feet, but he's a true freshman, and he's going against Ohio State in front of 104,000 fans, and he also is coming off a hamstring injury that bothered him last week. But he's one guy that is strong enough and quick enough to hold up. Tulane just doesn't have enough of those guys to play with in Ohio State. I'm
interested, about Tulane's secondary, because I was looking through some of the box scores of the games, and I saw, freshman quarterback for Wake Forest, Sam Hartman, had 378 yards passing, but then you look at the scoreboard, and they only put up 23 points in overtime. So I'm curious how that game played out, that there was such a dichotomy there.
Just a lot of short passes, and I'll give that guy credit. Sam Hartman played a heck of a game that day, because Tulane's game plan going into that was to force the freshman quarterback to beat them, and they played soft coverage a lot and thought they could confuse him. He was really on target. Wake Forest has 2 excellent receivers. It was pretty much just 10-yard, 8-yard passes all game long, and then Wake Forest had problems sustaining drives. They missed a chip shot field goal, had a couple of turnovers. Tulane's secondary is actually pretty good. Again, that doesn't equate to playing Ohio State particularly, but both of their cornerbacks, Donnie Lewis is a senior, a third-year starter with a ton of ability, who in the past did not play well when the ball was in the air. He's fixed those problems this year. He has 2 interceptions. He's tied for the conference lead with 6 breakups. He's a good player. He can cover good receivers. Their other cornerback, Thacarius Keys, had a spectacular interception against UAB in the end zone. He's a junior starting for the first year. He's going to be a really good player. Tulane's defense will be competitive in the American Athletic Conference. There are a lot of young guys and guys that aren't young that haven't played that much in the past. It's going to get better as the year goes along. But, again, we're talking Ohio State, which basically when their first-team offense was on the field in those first 2 games, they scored a touchdown, almost every time they had the ball. And I don't see where Tulane has the playmakers to be able to stop them really much at all.
Yeah, I want to ask you, Sam, here Gary, before I let you go, if there is anything that Tulane could do to make this a 4-quarter game, what would they have to do on Saturday?
They have to play. They need Ohio State. There's a lot of attention on the team's going to be really excited because Urban Meyer is coming back. But you got to look. Ohio State's playing at Penn State next week. That looks like to be by far the toughest game left on the schedule until the Michigan game. So Tulane needs Ohio State to be completely overlooking them like Oklahoma was last year, and Tulane needs to get off to a good start. When they played Oklahoma, which obviously had Baker Mayfield and was number 2 in the country, with 4 minutes left in the first half, it was a 21-14 football game, and Tulane was hanging right in there. They couldn't hold on. They didn't even have their starting quarterback in that game. So the key is for Tulane's offense needs to have success right off the bat, and they've been terrible in the first half this year in their other games. They didn't score against Wake Forest. they had 1 first down in their first 3 possessions against UAB. They need those guys to start off fast, just like they did against Oklahoma last year. They're going to be really excited. It was a huge opportunity for them. They all talk about how much they're looking forward to playing in that type of environment. By far the biggest stadium Tulane's ever played in the program's 125-year history. So they need to get off to a good start and then see what happens from there. That's the best case scenario for Tulane.
Gary Smith, he is the publisher of the Wave Report. Ohio State and Tulane kicking it off from 3:30 from the Horseshoe on Saturday afternoon. Gary, I appreciate you taking some time and previewing this from the Tulane perspective. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks for having me on the show.
And that will wrap it up again for the Unscripted Ohio podcast. As always, appreciate you tuning in. Be back again on Monday as Kirk Barton will co-host the podcast, and Ross Fulton, BuckeyeGrove.com analyst, will be back as we recap the Ohio State-Tulane game on Saturday and also kind of peek ahead to the big game, Ohio State and Penn State, next Saturday. You can catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. Please find us, rate us, review us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, and Stitcher, your medium of choice. Once again, follow us on there. Please rate and review. We will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend. And, of course, go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.